Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free. The sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the blue frontier.
Welcome to a new episode of Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast. This is David Helvarg, and my co-host, the mermaid from Colorado, is Vicki Nichols-Goldstein.
Welcome, everyone, from the Inland Ocean Coalition.
Today, our guests are Mike Sutton, a friend and executive director of the Goldman Environmental Prize, the world's leading annual awards for ordinary people who take extraordinary actions to protect the planet. Also, we're joined by Lindsay Gordon, head of the global programs at Parley for the Oceans, a global collaborative network working to protect our world's oceans. And today, instead of Blue News You Can Use segments, our whole show will be Blue News because although a lot happened at the United Nations Ocean Conference in Nice, France, June 9th to 13th, there was still little or no media coverage here in the US. So, Mike, Lindsay, you were both there. Maybe you can start by just telling us in what capacities you participated and what your overall impressions are of those 5 days of ocean meetings and global commitments.
So I was there with my team. There was about 10 of us from Parley for the Oceans from all over the world. And I was really there in a capacity to just reconnect with the global ocean community, to learn, to absorb. My main goal was just to go to see what's progressed since I was there at the first ocean conference, to learn, to meet new people, and to just progress what we're doing on a global scale with the momentum that we have.
And Mike, you've been to lots of these ocean conferences. How is this one different, if it was?
I'm still a bit jet lagged, having returned from Europe about midnight last night. But there have been some dramatic changes to these international ocean conferences over the last 30 years. I think the biggest one is there's a lot more transparency now than there ever was before. Civil society is engaged in a way that I would have never thought possible 20 or 30 years ago. And it's a good thing because even though there are hundreds of NGOs at these meetings and thousands of people, enough to bring Nice, France, in this case, to gridlock, it means that society is watching what happens. It's watching governments. And that's a huge improvement over the situation. In the past, there wasn't a green zone at these there was only a blue zone, and it was just a conversation between governments and industry. And you can imagine the quality of decision-making wasn't nearly as good. Now, no matter what any government official does, somebody is watching, and that's really helpful. I was there in this case this year with 6 Goldman Prize winners who worked on marine conservation achievements over the years. My job is to enhance the value of this international meeting to them and to sort of build the brand for the Goldman Prize internationally.
I just want to say real quick that the green zone is fantastic because that opens it up to people on the street associated with nonprofits, people who care, where when you were talking about the blue zone, they were only the officials who were actually making the decision. So it really is a conference for the people.
I've seen similar movements towards just centering different organizations, types of people, centering youth, centering Indigenous voices this year. That was huge. And then centering these big movements that are picking up momentum right now. To answer your question, Vicki, BBNJ, deep sea mining, global plastics treaty. Actually, right now we have 50 countries out of the 60 we need ratifying the BBNJ. That we'll need by the fall of this year to move forward with the High Seas Treaty, which is going to be key, as we all know, to protecting our oceans, stabilizing our climate, et cetera, moving forward here.
And so those countries signed on during this conference, which is...
Yeah, that's right.
19.
Someone the other day sent me a UN archive video of a press conference that I did along with Matt Gianni and a few other old-timers now when we were working to secure the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, which was the precursor to what Lindsay referred to as the BBNJ agreement. It's the Convention on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, governs our behavior on the high seas. The current treaty is much more comprehensive than the 1995 agreement that we secured back then. It's the natural successor to that. We've almost got enough countries, as you pointed out, for the treaty to enter into force. Once 60 countries have ratified, 120 days later, the treaty enters into force. So we're looking at the beginning of next year before that agreement enters into force. And then after a certain amount of time, even the countries that haven't ratified, like the U.S., will be bound by customary international law.
And so tell us a little about, it's taken 20 years to get here. You're almost there. What are the basics of the High Seas Treaty? What does this do to protect the world's oceans? Lindsay?
This is a global and international agreement saying that the countries are coming together on an international level to manage the high seas or the areas beyond national jurisdiction. This is working in parallel with the goal to protect 30% of our ocean by 2030. And it's also different because it's not countries saying I'm protecting 30% of my own area, of my own EEZ, but I'm helping to manage in a collaborative way the international waters.
Remember, the high seas are about 40% of the planet. And so it really matters. It's been a free-for-all. It's been a Wild West out there where only the flag states of vessels have jurisdiction. In the past, we began to try to get that under control, especially fishing activities on the high seas back 30 years ago. But now this agreement goes way beyond what we achieved then and governs everything from fishing, deep sea mining, the way countries interact on the high seas. And so more than just the flag states of vessels will have jurisdiction. And really the focus is to protect biodiversity on the high seas. We know that it isn't a barren wasteland out there or wastewater. It's actually, places like the White Shark Cafe are located on the high seas. And so what we do out there matters. And if we're going to go there and do things like deep seabed mining, heaven forbid, it ought to be done in a coherent manner that's governed by international law. And that's the point of the BBNJ agreement. It's taken many years to negotiate. We've been working toward it for 30 years, and it's finally going to enter into force. And that's real progress. Probably the single most impressive announcement was the declaration of the world's largest marine protected area by the president of French Polynesia. They've made their entire EEZ a marine protected area, well over 1 million square miles. Following on the heels, I must say, of one of our Goldman Prize winners from the Cook Islands, Jackie Evans, who achieved the same thing there back in pre-pandemic years. She won the Goldman Prize in 2019 for helping persuade the Cook Islands government through grassroots action to declare their entire EEZ, their 200-mile limit around all their islands, a marine protected area. And she's been working since to prevent any backsliding by the Cook Islands government toward deep seabed mining. But, it's a race to the top to see who can declare a bigger marine protected area than the next country. And that's real progress, since so much of our ocean history has been a race to the bottom. Serial depletion and so forth. So this is really 20 marine protected areas declared by 20 nations at this conference, the largest in the world. And so you had a sense, it sounds like you had a sense of some real progress taking place. Well, that's right. And of course, 30 by 30, not many people remember that 30 by 30 doesn't, we can't achieve it by just pledging or declaring protected areas and then forgetting about making them real. If they're just paper parks, they don't count. That's something that the Biodiversity Convention, the parties to the Biodiversity Convention emphasized when they created the 30 by 30 goal, is that they had to be real protected areas, not just paper parks. And that remains a challenge for countries like French Polynesia.
So as far as the next step after declaring these MPAs, obviously is going to be some level of enforcement. Was that discussed in the conference as to how these countries might somehow collaborate to ensure that we are really getting protections in these designated areas?
Part of the reason it's been the Wild West out there, free for all, is that nobody's watching. But now people are watching, so this is where technology is our friend.
Yeah, actually, a bit of the work that I did before plastic pollution was looking at how do we create a global system where we're supporting each other in different countries, especially the countries most in need, like the small island developing states, or let's call them the big ocean states, to have the resources that they need to be able to actually enforce these MPAs.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely going to be a big issue for French Polynesia, which has no navy and no coast guard to speak of. How are they going to patrol over 1 million square miles of ocean? It's a problem for Palau. It's a problem for the Cook Islands. It's a problem for any of these. I like the big ocean states better than small island states. Yeah, I mean, it's a universal problem. Now, the U.S. Coast Guard can help because we have cutters and aircraft all over the world. The Navy sometimes, the U.S. Navy helps. But it's a big ocean out there, especially the Pacific. And it's really tough to be everywhere at all times. It's really been easy in the past for the fleets of distant water nations like Taiwan and China, Korea, Japan, and the U.S. to just go out and do whatever they want.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you're up to date on the work of Outlaw Ocean or Ian or Bina, but they're saying 1 in 5 fish that ends up on a dinner plate is linked to some form of illegal fisheries, which is also including slavery on the high seas. There's the issue of bottom trawling, which has been highlighted beautifully in Ocean by David Attenborough, the film that just came out. So, I think this all points to something that was talked about a lot in my circles at UNOC, which was funding, that we need international funding for these mechanisms. Hopefully, once the High Seas Treaty gets passed, hopefully once countries start, building more MPAs and we are getting closer and closer to 30 by 30. But especially we need funding going towards, for example, indigenous peoples who, they steward 80% of global biodiversity and get less than 1% of funding from global philanthropies. I mean, so this is a mechanism that is being talked about at least, but it's definitely something that came out as a need.
Did the United States make any kind of commitments towards these topics? I know that we're not a signatory, but what was the reaction from the U.S.?
I don't think we can depend on the U.S. under this current administration for much leadership on ocean issues. That said, the agencies are continuing to do their work, and that's really important to recognize. But I think we're going to have to look for leadership elsewhere, and we desperately need it. I mean, I don't want to oversell what was accomplished there, because Enric Sala said we are inching toward 30 by 30 when we need to be sprinting toward the goal. And I'm afraid I have to agree with him. We're not making progress.
And Enric Sala is the head of Pristine Seas at the National Geographic, who's been very involved in creating MPAs. And person there, John Kerry, said that while the commitments were admirable, that it's not moving fast enough or at scale. So I think this is what you're both indicating.
Let me mention one other thing, and that is prior to the UN Ocean Conference in Monaco, there was a Blue Investment and Economics Forum. And at that meeting, they talked about all the new interest and commitment in deploying investment capital on behalf of our oceans in sustainable industries, promoting sustainable fishing, promoting all kinds of sustainable ocean industries. 30 years ago, nobody was talking about impact investment. There were no investment opportunities. Everybody was creating nonprofits, not for-profits. But today, young entrepreneurs are creating for-profits all over the place, and there is capital available to them. That, I think, the deployment of the power of commerce, the power of investment capital on behalf of our oceans is a real sea change that I think we haven't seen before, and we're just beginning to see now.
What some of the other issues that I wonder if they were part of the conference, plastic pollution, deep sea mining industry, were they there? Were they talked about?
Totally. I think this is a good segue to plastics, and then I'll go to deep sea mining. But in terms of connecting seaweed, right? Seaweed being another resource to help us get the nutrients we need. There's Sway out there, which is a really great startup, actually Bay Area based, that is making what would look like a plastic bag or packaging out of seaweed, and it's supporting seaweed farmers. And this is the type of thing, Mike, that I think you're talking about. That is really, really great steps in the right direction, that different industries are getting involved. In terms of plastics, there was a lot of progress in terms of the Global Plastics Treaty, which the next meeting is coming up in Geneva in August. 93-ish, I'm not sure if it's 93, 94, 95 countries signed the declaration that they want an ambitious plastic treaty, which is actually really important. And France was a leading voice in that. So this is really good progress in terms of plastics. I've been working with plastics and plastic pollution the past around 12 years, and it wasn't talked about even 10% as much as it's being talked about now. And this global plastics treaty could be huge. And I think this also brings me to another point that maybe it's important we touch on here, which is just the framework of UNOC and how that's different from something like when the Global Plastics Treaty meets or BBNJ meets or COP meets. Yeah. UNOC is less.
UNOC is UN Ocean Conference.
UNOC is less formal. So there are voluntary commitments that are made. It's a place where people can gather and create momentum, make commitments that can then be put into practice into a legal framework in these other conferences.
That's a really good point. And frankly, that's where we've always fallen down. I mean, as you all know, when you actually get to negotiating fisheries agreements or deep sea mining agreements or plastics agreements, that's when the political will seems to evaporate so often. It's really easy to go to Nice or wherever, Korea or Geneva, New York, and make commitments that governments can make commitments that they know are too expensive financially and politically to ever implement. And that's where I think the increased scrutiny from civil society really makes a difference, is now people are watching for that follow-up that Lindsay's talking about. They're holding governments accountable. They're holding their feet to the fire, at least to the extent possible, and demanding that accountability and progress that we need to see, because that's where the rubber meets the road. You can make all the voluntary commitments you want, and it just isn't going to matter much unless they're actually implemented.
Yeah, to have the implementation, to have the funding, to have the commitments, and then also to have people following what you're doing to make sure that you are really true to your word.
Do you love the salty characters and ocean champions we have on the Rising Tide? So do we, and we're dedicated to bringing inspiring stories and voices that make waves. But here's the catch. We need your support to keep the tide rolling. A tax-deductible donation at bluefront.org will help keep the Rising Tide on the air and online. If you're ready and able to amplify these salty voices for the sea, dive in with a donation, big or small. Visit bluefront.org and join the movement. And now, back to the show.
This was another thing that happened there, is 9 more countries committed to a moratorium on deep sea mining. Mm-hmm. So apparently France in leadership and New Zealand got a significant number of the world's nations now saying, this is a bad idea. Let's hold off till we know more.
Exactly, David. And what's great is France is even calling for a ban, which is what in my circles we're calling for. A moratorium is a pause. That's great. We're headed there. We're at, I think, 37 now in terms of countries and a number of industry, including BMW and Volvo, Google. But what we really need is a ban, is more people coming out and saying that we need a ban. This is a way that we can actually stop opening a new exploitative frontier that we don't actually need. And it is actually just an industry-led story that we will need this. The way to get out of land-based mining and the destructive practices there is not to open a new frontier and go to deep sea mining and exploit and destruct million-year-old coral, lifting up the sediment that disrupts the ecosystem, that releases carbon that will make its way into our atmosphere and contribute to climate change, and a new frontier that we don't know much about. There isn't enough scientific evidence. And beyond that, I even learned that the metals that they're looking to, which is cobalt, nickel, and copper, cobalt and nickel isn't even being used in these batteries anymore. We're moving on to new technology. And copper only makes up 1% of these nodules that they're planning on picking up from the deep sea.
Plus, we're discovering things that we don't even know about in these new frontier regions. I mean, in 1977, we discovered the geothermal vents were full of life. Suddenly we realized that all life in the universe isn't photosynthetic, it's chemosynthetic. And now they've just discovered dark oxygen in these zones they want to mine, that these nodules, maybe through some form of electrolysis with seawater, are creating oxygen. And this is a whole new concept of how oxygen is created in the universe. So these are the places where we discover new frontiers of science and understanding, not to be exploited and ruined before we know what we're doing.
Look at the difference between how we treat fisheries and how we treat marine mammals. Fisheries is a matter of sustainable use. It's been an elusive goal, but that's still our goal, and it should be. And we can make it, there are all kinds of ways to make it more sustainable, our fishing. With marine mammals, we don't have that goal. There is no sustainable use of marine mammals. We've decided that as a society, it's about fully protecting those species. And we can do the same thing for habitats. And the deep ocean is one place that we don't, as you point out, we have institutions like MBARI, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute right up the coast here, that are discovering new species literally every week in the deep ocean and the deeper parts of the ocean. So we ought not to be going and destroying habitats that we don't know even how many species are there.
So save the whales, save the nodules.
Save the vampire squid, David. I mean, you got to use the right charismatic species there, right?
Yeah, or the Dumbo.
Dumbo octopus.
That's a great one.
I know we talked about, the high seas, the plastic pollution. Where do we fit in with the climate conversations, and how does that tie into ocean protection?
I mean, it's a good question, Vicki. I think, to my perception anyway, the climate crisis kind of pervaded the entire discussion, all of the entire conference, because everybody recognizes that if we don't solve the climate crisis in due course, we're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Yes, we have to solve those proximate crises first. If we don't stop overfishing, there's going to be nothing around left to enjoy the warmer ocean. But at the same time, we all recognize that the oceans is the lungs of the planet. Sylvia Earle was there, oversubscribed, as you might imagine, reminding us that no blue, no green. And it's very true. The question is how to make sure that we do make progress on climate at the same time as we're looking after these ocean issues. There was a tremendous number of side events on blue carbon, for example, and the role of mangroves and seagrass beds and ocean habitats like that in mitigating climate change. But clearly not enough is being done. And there are warning signs all around. There were scientific symposiums. The week before, there was a whole science symposium, series of science meetings the week before. It reminded me of the old days at the International Whaling Commission, where the scientists would convene prior to the decision makers, the commission itself, and tell people what they really needed to be doing. And then the Whaling Commission would convene and completely ignore the science, which is, again, our tradition in ocean management.
So this is really, climate is, as you say, defining the ocean now. It's literally changing the physical nature of the ocean. It's chemistry, it's temperature, it's circulation, it's color.
I wanted to ask you, what were some of the pressing issues that were not addressed at this conference that you thought should have been brought up?
Well, I can tell you one that's usually it's such a hot button issue that people sometimes punt on it, and that's, sustainable fishing. Mm-hmm. The Marine Stewardship Council was there and are doing its part. They had a big reception, very well attended set of panels. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of participation by the fishing industry. Lindsay mentioned David Attenborough's new film, Ocean. And is it helpful to have a major new film by such an important ambassador like Attenborough on oceans? Yes. But I couldn't help but think, some of these things we've been ringing the alarm bell for a long time. We haven't done much about.
We have been ringing it.
And overfishing and its links to at-sea slavery and labor abuse have been known a long time.
That's the other thing that we've talked about peripherally here. Clearly today, you cannot separate environmental protection from human rights. They are commingled issues. If you are talking about slavery in Indonesian fisheries, is that a human rights issue or is it an environmental issue? Well, obviously it's both, and they're intermingled. You have to solve them. You can't have sustainable fisheries that depend on forced labor. We have to come to grips with both environmental protection and human rights at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So with all this citizen action, with all this civil society attendant there, maybe instead of at the next ocean conference, instead of the blue zone and the green zone, it should be like the blue zone and the bluer zone.
Well, it's funny. People who are new to these conferences don't understand the relationship between the blue and the green zone. 25 years ago, there was only a blue zone. There was no green zone. There was this level of interest wasn't there. And it's tremendously encouraging to see the green zone, to see how popular it was. And yes, the green zone puts a lot of pressure on the blue zone to act, and that's super helpful. We've learned over the years that when you put decision making in the spotlight, when you shine the light of transparency in these things, you tend to get better decisions as a result. But it's not perfect yet, and we're still not getting the pace of decision making. The tough decisions are just as hard to take now as they were, because they require political compromise, and there are powerful industries at stake, and they have lobbies. And so the plastics industry, the industry that was interested in deep seabed mining, the fishing industry, as you all know, these are powerful forces, and we shouldn't think this is going to be easy, even with a greater involvement of civil society.
This conversation here is all making me think of, to me, there was a lot of good, and I can get to more of that, but what I would have loved to see more is there was so much civil society. There was so much opportunity in the green zone for people to connect. I'm a big fan of call to actions. So, for example, if we're talking about overfishing, if we're talking about sea slavery, maybe an area of the green zone that was just a place where civil society, individuals, politicians, if they can go and sign on to different types of petitions, different types of commitments. And there could have been, or could maybe be in future ones, a place where people can go and actually petition, sign up, write their name, even if that commitment just goes home with them in their own mind to bring back into their lives.
And into their communities.
Exactly. What I hope comes out of this conference is a global community where we are having conversations, and maybe in a formal or informal ways, on how we're following up with what we come home with and what we want to bring to our communities.
This was a great conversation, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your perspectives. Michael Sutton, Lindsay Gordon, thank you so much for joining us on the Rising Tide Ocean Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you all.
You too.
Pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on the Rising Tide Ocean Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and leave us a review or share it with your friends and other ocean lovers. Follow us on Instagram and visit bluefront.org for more updates and additional resources. Rising Tide is a production of Blue Frontier, co-hosted by David Helvark and me, Vicki Nichols-Goldstein of the Inland Ocean Coalition, with production support from Holden Hardcastle of Fluid Studios, Natasha Benjamin, and Nick Paz, and editing services provided by Charles Landon of Studio Cape May. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay hopeful and stay salty.
Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free. The sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the blue frontier. Off in the salty ocean, off to the blue frontier.
Sparky, come here, buddy. Sparky! There you are. Good boy, Sparky.